The early morning sun was just beginning to rise over Arlington National Cemetery, casting long shadows over the rows of white headstones. The air was crisp and the quiet was almost sacred, broken only by the occasional footsteps of visitors and the soft rustling of leaves. The tomb of the unknown soldier stood at the center of it all, a symbol of the nation's deepest respect for those who had given everything in service to their country. Guards in crisp uniforms moving with precise steps watched over the tomb, their faces serious, their posture perfect. They had been trained to maintain absolute discipline. Every movement, every gesture, every second of their watch mattered. For them, this was not just a job, it was a sacred duty. That morning, however, something unusual was about to happen. A man named Jack, a veteran who had served alongside some of the finest soldiers in the Navy SEALs, walked slowly toward the tomb. Jack was a quiet man, the kind who did not seek attention or praise, but his heart was full of respect and love for the men and women who had sacrificed so much. In his hands, he carried something fragile but deeply significant: the ashes of his friend, a fellow Navy SEAL who had passed away only a few months earlier. Jack had not come to make a scene or break any rules. His friend had asked him before he passed to make a small gesture of remembrance near the tomb of the unknown soldier. It was meant to be private, quiet, and deeply personal. But as Jack approached, he noticed the guards watching him with a cautious, almost suspicious gaze. "Sir, can I help you?" one of the guards asked in a calm but firm voice. Jack stopped a few steps away, holding the small urn carefully. "Yes," he said softly. "I'm here to honor my friend. He was a Navy SEAL and he asked me to leave his ashes near this place. I just want to do it quietly, respectfully." The guard's eyes narrowed slightly. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step back. This area is restricted and no items may be placed near the tomb." Jack's heart sank. He had expected rules, yes, but he had hoped that a small gesture like this, one meant only to honor a fallen comrade, would be understood. He tried to explain. "I understand the rules, I really do. But this isn't just any item. It's the ashes of a soldier who gave everything for his country. I don't want to leave them on the ground or disrespect them in any way. I just want to honor him here." The guard's expression remained firm. "I'm sorry, sir. You have to leave." Jack felt a wave of disbelief. How could this be happening? He had served his country, his friend had served his country, and now when all he wanted was a quiet moment of respect, he was being turned away. His hands tightened around the urn, and for a moment he simply stood there, unsure of what to do. Around them, other visitors began to notice the interaction. A few stopped and watched, sensing the tension in the air. Whispers spread quietly among the small crowd that had gathered. "What's going on?" someone asked. "Why is he being asked to leave?" Jack tried to stay calm. He had always been a man of action, but this situation required patience and careful words. "I'm not trying to break the rules," he said again. "I'm trying to honor my friend. He gave his life, and this was his wish. Please, is there a way to make this right?" The guard shook his head. "I can't allow it, sir. I have orders. Please step back." Jack realized that arguing further would not help. He knew the guard was only doing his job, following orders. But still it felt wrong. The tomb was meant to honor soldiers, yet now it seemed like rules were standing in the way of respect. He looked down at the small urn and felt the weight of history and sacrifice in his hands. A few moments later, the tension grew as more people gathered. Some were veterans themselves, and they could see what Jack was trying to do. They began to speak quietly among themselves, some shaking their heads in disbelief. "He's just trying to honor his friend," one man said. "Why is that so hard to understand?" Despite the crowd's concern, the guards maintained their positions, and Jack was gently but firmly asked to leave. As he turned, a mix of sorrow and frustration filled him. He had expected understanding, compassion, a moment to honor his friend. Instead, he felt as if the very institution meant to honor soldiers was denying a simple act of respect. Walking away, Jack's mind raced. He thought of his friend, the laughter they had shared, the missions they had completed together, the camaraderie and trust that only soldiers truly understand. How could a few rules erase all of that? How could the memory of someone who had sacrificed so much be dismissed so quickly? But Jack did not give up. He knew that true respect was not about confrontation. It was about persistence, about making people understand the human side of duty and honor. He spoke quietly to the other visitors who had gathered, explaining the story of his friend, of their service, and of what he was trying to do. Slowly, the crowd began to understand. There was a shared sense of outrage, but more importantly, a shared sense of empathy. People began to see that this was not about breaking rules. It was about honoring a life devoted to courage and country. Meanwhile, the guards maintained their positions, still unsure of what to do. They had strict orders, and any deviation could have consequences. But even they could see the sincerity in Jack's eyes, the reverence in the way he held the ashes, and the quiet dignity in his words. There was a lesson forming here, one that was bigger than any rule. Jack finally stepped back, giving the guards the space they demanded, but he made a silent promise to himself. This moment would not be forgotten. His friend deserved better, and he would find a way to ensure that the sacrifice of every soldier, especially those who gave everything, was honored properly. That morning, the cemetery remained silent once more, but the air felt heavier, charged with the tension of a lesson waiting to be learned. Witnesses left with a mix of sadness and admiration, carrying with them a story that was just beginning. Jack walked away, his heart heavy but resolute, knowing that the true tribute to a soldier was not only in ceremonies and rituals, but in the recognition of courage, empathy, and humanity. Little did anyone know, this incident, simple as it seemed, would spark a chain of events that would reach the highest levels of the military. It would challenge tradition, question rules, and ultimately teach a lesson that no guard, no soldier, and no visitor at Arlington would ever forget.
Word of what had happened at Arlington National Cemetery spread quickly.
What was meant to be a quiet, private act of respect had turned into a story that touched the hearts of many. Veterans groups, families of fallen soldiers, and everyday citizens alike began to talk about Jack's experience. Many felt angered by the way the situation was handled. How could someone be denied the chance to honor a friend who had given everything for his country? Veterans in particular were moved. They understood the bond Jack had with his fallen comrade. It wasn't just friendship. It was a connection forged through trust, courage, and shared sacrifice. Many of them had lost friends in combat, friends whose families never got the chance to say goodbye properly. They could feel Jack's pain, and they wanted to see him succeed in honoring his friend. Letters, emails, and calls of support began to reach Jack from every corner of the country. Some were short and simple. "We understand. You did the right thing." Others were long, heartfelt stories of their own fallen friends, their own moments of loss, and the memories they wanted to preserve. Meanwhile, Arlington National Cemetery found itself under quiet but growing scrutiny. The administration faced a delicate problem. The guards had acted according to rules, but public opinion was increasingly on Jack's side. Newspapers reported on the incident, highlighting the tension between strict protocol and human empathy. Social media, of course, amplified the story further. Posts and messages of support for Jack and his fallen friend spread like wildfire. Some posts expressed frustration at the guards, but many others focused on the larger issue, the need to honor the living memories of the soldiers who had served. Jack, however, did not seek attention. He had never wanted this to become a story. All he had wanted was to honor a friend. But now the story had taken on a life of its own. He began to receive messages from veterans he had never met, from families he had never known, all urging him to stand firm. They told him not to give up, to continue seeking a way to fulfill his friend's last wish. Their words strengthened Jack's resolve. He realized that this was bigger than just one gesture. This was about the respect owed to every soldier who had sacrificed for their country. Amid the growing attention, military officials took notice. Reports of the incident reached the desk of a high-ranking general, someone who had served in combat, who had lost soldiers under his command, and who understood the weight of grief and respect. The general read through the accounts carefully, noting the sincerity in Jack's actions and the confusion surrounding the guards' response. He understood the tension between strict military rules and human decency. Protocol existed for a reason, yes, but rules could sometimes become barriers when they overshadowed compassion. The general decided to act. He knew that a personal approach would be far more effective than letters or memos. He scheduled a visit to Arlington National Cemetery himself, intending to speak with both Jack and the guards. He wanted to see for himself what had happened, to understand the perspectives of everyone involved. For him, it was not about assigning blame. It was about restoring respect where it had been unintentionally denied. On the day of his visit, the cemetery was quieter than usual. The general arrived in his uniform, Polished and precise, yet his presence had a calm authority that immediately commanded attention. Guards who had been on duty the day of the incident approached him, standing at attention. They were nervous. After all, they had followed orders, but now they were facing someone with the power to change the outcome completely. The general acknowledged them with a respectful nod and then turned to Jack, who had been waiting patiently. Jack felt a mixture of awe and relief. Here was someone who truly understood military service, someone who could see past the rules to the heart of the matter. He explained again calmly why he had come to the tomb, what the gesture meant to him, and how important it was to honor his fallen friend. The general listened carefully, not interrupting, his eyes never leaving Jack's face. It was clear he was weighing every word, considering both the rules and the human element of the story. After hearing Jack's account, the general turned to the guards. His tone was firm but kind. "You followed protocol," he said. "That is your duty, and you did nothing wrong in carrying it out. But we must remember that behind every action at this cemetery there is a human story, a life, a sacrifice. Discipline is important, but so is understanding. Rules should serve people, not the other way around." The guards looked at one another, absorbing the words. Some nodded slowly, realizing that the situation had been more complex than they had first understood. The general continued, explaining that exceptions could sometimes be made when it came to honoring soldiers who had given everything for their country. Compassion, he said, should guide decisions, especially in extraordinary circumstances like the one Jack had faced. He then addressed both Jack and the guards together. "Today a lesson has been learned," the general said. "A soldier's sacrifice deserves respect, and the people who come to honor that sacrifice deserve our understanding. Rules are necessary, yes, but they must never replace human decency and empathy. We honor those who have given everything, not only with ceremonies and rituals, but with the care and respect we show to their memory." The atmosphere shifted. There was a sense of relief and understanding that had been missing before. Jack felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The guards, too, began to see that what had happened was not a failure, but a moment of learning, an opportunity to balance discipline with humanity. The general's words were clear. Honoring soldiers went beyond protocol. It was about seeing the person behind every uniform, every story, and every sacrifice. Following this intervention, the cemetery administration arranged a proper way for Jack to fulfill his friend's last wish. A small respectful ceremony was planned, attended by a few select veterans, family members, and cemetery officials. The ashes were placed with the utmost care, accompanied by words of remembrance and gratitude. Jack felt a deep sense of closure. His friend and every soldier who had served had been honored in a way that matched the sacrifice they had made. The story did not end there. The lesson the general imparted was shared widely among military personnel, guards, and veterans organizations. It became an example of how rules, while important, should never overshadow compassion. Guards were reminded that their vigilance was valuable, but empathy was equally vital. The incident encouraged others to think carefully about how to balance respect, protocol, and human understanding. For Jack, the experience was transformative. What had begun as a simple act of honoring a friend had turned into a story that reached thousands, teaching lessons about courage, respect, and compassion. It reminded him that even in places bound by rules and discipline, the human heart must always guide action. Veterans, families, and visitors would talk about that morning for years to come, remembering the Navy SEAL who had been honored, the friend who had persevered, and the general who taught a lesson that would resonate long after the day had ended. As the sun set over Arlington, casting a golden glow over the white headstones, a quiet peace returned to the cemetery. Visitors walked among the graves, some reflecting on personal losses, others in awe of the sacrifices commemorated there. And in the midst of it all, Jack stood quietly, knowing that his friend's memory had been honored properly, that a lesson had been learned, and that respect, courage, and empathy had triumphed in a place where they mattered most. That day, the incident became more than just a story about rules or misunderstanding. It became a story about human connection, the deep bonds formed through service, and the ways in which compassion can guide even the most disciplined institutions. It was a reminder to everyone who visited, worked, or served at Arlington National Cemetery that behind every uniform, every guard, and every stone, there is a story worth honoring. And so, the memory of the Navy SEAL, The persistence of his friend Jack and the wisdom of the general came together to create a moment that would never be forgotten. It was a lesson in courage, respect, and above all, the power of understanding. The kind of lesson that would continue to inspire those who heard it for generations. After the events at Arlington National Cemetery and the general's intervention, the story continued to grow in significance. For Jack, it was no longer just about fulfilling the last wish of his fallen friend. It had become a journey of understanding, a journey about how compassion, respect, and courage can change even the most rigid institutions. The small act of carrying his friend's ashes had ignited something bigger, a movement that reminded everyone of the human side of duty and honor. In the days following the general's visit, Arlington began to adjust its approach. Guards were given special guidance on handling unique situations with empathy, while still maintaining the discipline and order the cemetery required. The administration realized that rules alone could not always capture the importance of personal gestures meant to honor soldiers. They began to meet with veterans, families, and visitors to discuss how best to balance protocol with respect. It became clear that a cemetery like Arlington was more than just a place of regulation. It was a place of memory, of reflection, and of human connection. Jack, meanwhile, continued to receive messages from across the country. Letters from fellow veterans spoke of their own experiences and the importance of honoring those who had served. Families of fallen soldiers wrote to express gratitude for what he had done. Many shared stories of their loved ones, hoping that their memories would be preserved with the same dignity and care Jack had shown. Each letter reinforced the lesson that had begun at the tomb that day. Sacrifice deserves recognition, and empathy should guide our actions. The small ceremony that followed was simple but powerful. A select group of veterans, family members, and cemetery staff gathered near the tomb of the unknown soldier. Jack carried the urn carefully, each step measured and respectful. The general, present as a witness and mentor, gave a brief speech reminding everyone that honoring the fallen is about more than ceremony. It is about remembering the person, the courage and the life behind every story. The ashes were placed with great care, and a moment of silence followed. It was a quiet but profound tribute to a life of service, courage, and dedication. Visitors who witnessed the ceremony felt its significance. They saw the solemnity, the respect, and the deep emotion that filled the air. Some quietly wiped away tears, touched by the act of remembrance. Others spoke in hushed tones about their own memories, about friends or family members who had served and were now gone. The story had become more than just one man's act. It had become a collective experience of grief, respect, and honor. For the guards, the event was equally transformative. They had followed rules, as they had been trained, but now they understood the importance of balance. Discipline was necessary, but it had to be coupled with compassion. They learned that sometimes, understanding and flexibility could honor the very values they had sworn to protect. The general's guidance had given them clarity, showing that true service is not only about precision, but also about recognizing the human stories behind every action. Jack felt a deep sense of closure. His friend's memory had been honored in the most respectful way possible, and the lessons learned would continue to resonate at Arlington. Yet he also realized that the story was bigger than him. It was about all the soldiers who had served, all the families who had lost loved ones, and all the people who believed in respecting sacrifice. It was about ensuring that courage, commitment, and human dignity were never forgotten, no matter how strict the rules might seem. As the days turned into weeks, Arlington National Cemetery saw a quiet transformation. Guards approached their duties with renewed understanding, visitors were reminded of the importance of empathy, and veterans who came to honor their comrades felt a deeper sense of connection. The incident had sparked conversations, not just about protocol, but about the values that guide every action in the service of the country. The lessons from Jack's story reached beyond the cemetery gates, inspiring those in the military and government, and in everyday life to think carefully about how they honor others. Jack also found personal growth in the experience. He reflected often on the bonds he had shared with his friend, on the missions they had undertaken together, and on the moments of laughter, fear, and trust that had defined their service. The act of honoring his friend had reminded him that even after death, the memories and the values of those who served could continue to influence and inspire. He understood more deeply that every soldier's life, no matter how long or short, leaves a legacy that deserves acknowledgement. The general, too, observed the lasting impact of his intervention. He knew that the story of Jack and the Navy SEAL would serve as a powerful example for guards, soldiers, and civilians alike. It reminded everyone that leadership is not only about enforcing rules, but about guiding others with wisdom and empathy. A single decision, made with understanding and respect, could ripple outward, touching lives in ways that might never be fully measured. The general's lesson was clear. True honor comes from seeing the person behind every uniform, the courage behind every act, and the humanity behind every rule. Communities beyond Arlington also took notice. Schools invited veterans to speak about the importance of service and empathy. Local organizations organized events to recognize acts of courage and remembrance. Jack himself was occasionally invited to share his experience, always careful to emphasize the message of respect, honor, and compassion. He spoke about his friend, about the moment at the tomb, and about how a single act of understanding could turn a painful situation into a lesson for everyone involved. The story of the Navy SEAL, his friend Jack, and the general spread far beyond the borders of Arlington. It became an example of how ordinary people, guided by values of courage, empathy, and respect, could influence institutions and traditions in meaningful ways. Readers, listeners, and viewers were inspired not just by the heroism of the soldiers, but by the kindness and wisdom shown in response to a difficult situation. It reminded them that honor is not only about medals and ceremonies, it is about understanding, compassion, and the respect we show one another. Years later, Jack would often return to Arlington. Walking quietly among the graves, he remembered his friend with a smile and a sense of peace. The lessons of that day had stayed with him. He had learned that courage is not only about facing danger in the field, but also about standing up for what is right. He had learned that respect for others, especially those who have sacrificed, is a responsibility shared by all. And he had learned that even in places bound by rules and tradition, human decency must always guide actions. The guards at Arlington, too, carried the lesson forward. New recruits were taught not just precision and discipline, but also empathy and understanding. Stories of Jack, his fallen friend, and the general's guidance were shared during training sessions. It became a part of the culture at Arlington, an enduring reminder that honor is as much about the heart as it is about duty. In the end, the Navy SEAL's ashes found their rightful place. But the story created something far greater. It created a ripple of understanding, teaching people across the nation about courage, respect, and the power of compassion. It reminded everyone that rules exist to serve humanity, not to limit it. It showed that even small acts, when done with sincerity and heart, can have a profound impact. Jack often reflected on the moment when he first stood at the tomb, holding the ashes, unsure of what would happen. What had seemed like a small, personal act had transformed into a story that touched thousands. It had tested rules, traditions, and human patience, but it had ultimately reaffirmed something timeless: the value of empathy, the importance of respect, and the enduring power of memory. As the sun rose and set over Arlington National Cemetery, a quiet peace filled the air. Visitors, veterans, and guards all moved through the sacred space with a deeper understanding of the human stories that lay behind every headstone, every uniform, and every act of service. And at the center of it all, the Navy SEAL's memory, honored by his friend Jack and recognized by those in authority, served as a lasting reminder that courage, honor, and compassion are always connected. The story ended not just with a ceremony or a corrected mistake, but with a profound lesson that would echo for generations. It was a story of friendship, of respect, and of leadership guided by humanity. And it was a story that reminded everyone, soldier or civilian, that honoring sacrifice is more than a rule to follow. It is a responsibility to uphold with the fullest understanding of heart and mind.